What's going on, creators? Yeah, I just want to get on here and bring everybody back to now. Appreciate y'all being here and vibing with me for a bit. Yeah, today I'd like to talk a little bit about revising the dying process, and how we can look at our friends, family, pets, loved ones that are actively dying, or ones that have recently passed, or even not so recently passed, and look at that through a different lens, one that's not based on fear and separation, but one based on connectedness, unity, oneness, and heavenly, a heavenly process. So it's weird to me. So many people are kind of facing these issues of death secretly almost. It's like no one talk, at least in like the culture I live in. It's like that, where a lot of the death and dying process is in like the hospital or in like a nursing home. It's every once in a while, it's like you'll get people that have like hospice in their own home and stuff like that, but for the most part it seems like here where I live, it's something that most people experience through nursing homes and hospitals. But it's one of those things that a lot of people don't even talk about, that they're going through these grieving processes, or they're by someone's bedside and they did not have a good dying experience. There was somebody that was close to our family that got seriously burned. It was a tragic accident, and it's just like the enduring of that kind of thing before they eventually pass. It's like everybody's got a different way that happens, but not to even sit there and judge that as like, oh man, that's terrible and awful, because so much of like the dying process, I feel like, is us projecting our own dramas on the situation. And so instead of like projecting our own fears, our own insecurities, our own unknowns onto things, it's better to start to kind of revise these mental narratives as they start to emerge in consciousness, and that's where we start to let them go. So if there's any type of fear and reactivity, which death brings a lot of that kind of fear and reactivity, it can cause people to double down on unconsciousness, but it can also cause people to become more conscious and more present and more filled with awareness as they handle these different situations. And so the way the world kind of portrays like normal is to be reactive to fear in any type of crisis situation. It's like, oh, it's first step, who's most fearful, who's most hysterical. That means they care the most. So it's like if you're not exhibiting those kinds of characteristics, a lot of times you can be looked at as like the weirdo that's like maybe on the spectrum. It's like, oh, he must be on the spectrum because he's not hysterical like I'm hysterical. Or they're, oh, he must be a sociopath, or he must be, whatever label that people want to throw at you, by just not becoming hysterical in the face of different situations. That's their problem. A lot of times people confess what they're guilty of. So it's like looking at this whole process through a different lens, especially if you looked at the actual, someone actually going through like an active dying process. As I worked in a nursing home when I was in high school, so I was like exposed to a lot of that. To a point, it was kind of callous, to look back on it. But we would like gamble and like bet on who would like die next. And in that environment, that you almost have to develop that kind of like morbid humor. Is like, I remember one time specifically, and probably people that work in like palliative care and nursing homes and hospital settings, I'm sure they have that kind of thing as a coping mechanism in a lot of ways, because you get attached to people. I got attached to people at the nursing home. I just like their personalities, and then they'd break their hip and then get all medicated, and then you just watch them just go from being at one stage to no, now they're starting to fucking decline. And even that whole process of declining is kind of strange when you think about it. It's like, why does that process even initiate? My belief at the moment, is it's a result of the mental narratives going on within. As my dog was starting to die, there was the same process that I've noticed in people. Same thing happened with her. It was like, it was shortly after my dad died. It was like in the winter. I was always concerned of my dog. She was like 19, almost 20. I live in a climate where the winters can be pretty intense, and the ground can get fucking ice hard. So it's like in the winter, if something dies, it's like, hopefully you can find like a place to cremate them. because good luck digging into the ground. I mean, it's like digging into a stone. But like, so I was always concerned, not like overly about it, but like when winter would hit, and when my dad died, it was on Christmas, and it was like shortly after my dog started like showing signs and symptoms of like an active dying process. And I didn't really mention it, on these streams, mainly because, I try to keep these streams focused on the eternal present, and like in that, it's like the here and now. Her essence is still alive with the one, so it's like, putting out an energy like that, is something I was like trying to avoid, and putting out that kind of drama. I didn't want to like speak it into reality either, and speak curses, but looking back, I probably could have been more objective about it, and like kind of shared that, because so many other people are going through these things in private, and not talking about it, not sharing how they're feeling, especially when there's like drama, and it's like, oh, this cascade of issues, it's like, oh, first it started with this, then it's this, now this is like this cascade of, I was like, you can't keep up with these symptoms anymore. It's just like one thing after next after next. But when she first started exhibiting these symptoms of like, oh, she's like getting up there in age, I noticed in myself the mental narrative starting to shift, and to take ownership and responsibility of life and everything that's going on. It's like I got to take ownership of, like, there was reactivity, there was fear, there was, oh, I got to fix this problem, which then starts to then grow the problem. But also accepting that is doing the best we can. Everything is hindsight's 20/20 type thing. But when she started exhibiting those symptoms, it's like, oh fuck, here we go again. But like, looking at the progression, there was so much like care and so much loving towards the end, because like then the thought started becoming, how much time, it's like, is today going to be the day, and then making every day really, not being unconscious about it, but valuing them as being there, an opportunity to care for them, to extend love to them. There's all types of ways to start to revise this whole process, because as it gets closer and closer, the same kind of, not talking like traumatic, oh boom, they're gone, but this active dying process, where it's like, okay, well, first there's like this stage where it's like you realize that, okay, something, the trajectory is slowly starting to move downhill, and it's like you start noticing now like a terminal, like it's like, oh, it's like nothing going on that we can really help at this point. It's just terminal, and you can apply that to people that you love and care about, and you can look at, when you're spending time with them, the mental narratives that you're telling yourself about it. It's like, are you exhibiting a lot of attachment towards them? Like, oh, I just need you to fulfill something within me. I need you there to comfort and soothe me. Whatever you're valuing in the relationship. Is it focused on self, or is it focused on something bigger than self? And if it's focused on self, then there can be a lot of grief and a lot of pain at loss. Because it's like, what are you doing for me? I'm going to lose this. Instead of like owning your own feelings, your own state, owning your own vibration, however you want to say that, looking at others as fulfilling needs is really kind of falling into this trick of looking, for an outside situation to create an internal state, when it's actually the exact opposite. You can create the internal state, and then through this metaphysical process, God kind of just externalizes it and shows you like a big mirror, what you're being, what your identity is in the situation, and ultimately, if you're trying to put on the new man, as the Bible would say, your new identity in Christ, your kind of role in a lot of this dying and death process, is to embody heaven, embody, that calmness, that peace, and not embodying fear and hysteria in the face of it. So it's like, whenever you're confronted with these stages, and if you're more you have higher levels of awareness, if you're around that more, this might seem basic, but this is just like my experience, where it's just like you have the terminal spot, which is an intense time, because there's still, it's like the person's conscious it's still the same, but only now it's easier on some level to be present and enjoy the day, and enjoy that kind of creating good moments and creating good memories, and not projecting your own fear and hysteria onto the situation, but try to embody love and peace and joy, and create a good memory with that person. Because as the next stage arrives, where it's almost like when they go from terminal, it's like, oh, you can still get around, you're still doing basically what you're doing. The only difference is like now you got this mental narrative going on of like, oh, is this today it? It's like, what's going to happen next? Is it going to get worse? It's like these what ifs and this fear of the unknown. And the more that you can let go of a lot of those fears of the unknown, the better it is for the present moment, to be able to not have the reactivity, the resistance, but getting more into a space of just acceptance, accepting that person, they might be in a state of fear, and if your mental narratives, because we're all psychically kind of connected, so it's like if your thoughts on those things are fear, hysteria, loss, grief, suffering, a lot of times that can then start to resonate with the other person. They can feel that energy, and it's almost like they'll start reflecting a lot of that fear and hysteria, and it doesn't make the situation better, is what I'm trying to say. But also we're all doing the best we can with the but when it moves to the next stage, start to revising these narratives of like, oh, they're dying, they're going to be separated from me, they're going to be gone forever, I'm not going to see them again, blah blah blah, all these stories of the ego mind of separation and fear, you can start to replace with new thoughts, and a lot of those new thoughts that come from instead of looking at it as death being the end, looking at it as a birth. They're getting born into their new identity in a new form, almost like a metamorphosis of consciousness is a way to maybe think about it. But ultimately go within, ask God yourself how to look at these things, because a big part of this is also in your evolution of consciousness too, because you're not separate from the other, so it's like, part of you is dying, it's part of your identity. I'm no longer going to have this being, this person, this whatever, this relationship, and that's an attack on your identity as well. So it's like it's a corresponding thing, it's a correlation between not only that person that's dealing with it on their their own walk, but then you do too, because of the connected nature of things. And so to start processing this new experience is to start looking at it more as a birth. They're being born into a new form, and ultimately being merged back with consciousness. It's just my experience, my faith at least, where it's like when something, everything part of creation is part of God's consciousness. And so it's like when a form changes, it's almost like God just rips off the mask, and all those attributes that are loving, that you feel fondness towards, that you're connected with, are all attributes of God. And it's like, how would like a father without having experienced that in form? It's like we have these imaginings of what the invisible creator is like, but until we experience in a form through knowledge and experience, it's like they're just concepts, but people embody these concepts, and when they pass, it's a like almost like an eternal form that embodies that state, if that makes sense. And so helping to tell yourself different narratives in the face of those means first checking the narratives going on within you, a lot of which can be fearful and hysterical, but realize that fear exists only within your own mind. It doesn't exist outside of you, and just with that acknowledgement, it creates space enough that you can then start to ask yourself, what does the mind of peace say about this? I'm listening to the mind of chaos and fear, but that's that's not reflective of who I am in Christ. What does the Holy Spirit say about that? And be still and just wait. Wait on the Lord to give you a new thought about a thing. A lot of times you'll get a lot of the resistance and a lot of the thoughts and beliefs and assumptions that are keeping us in that state of fear and hysteria. It's like, oh well, they're be gone. Oh, they're suffering. Oh, there's this. Oh, whatever the narrative is within your own consciousness that's keeping you in a state of fear and hysteria about the situation. Don't become attached to those thoughts, but just continue to wait on the Holy Spirit to, for one, show you what's bubbling up in your consciousness that's showing you your beliefs, but then allow a new belief to emerge after being able to just be still and trust that answer is coming. And when it does, it brings healing. That's the difference between the two minds. For the first mind, it causes suffering and torment, where the mind of peace creates healing from those thoughts, and you can feel that within your own being as being true. And like moving into the next stage of the dying process, if it's not some tragic, I'm gonna say, if it's not just some boom, we don't even, they just had a heart attack. My great uncle, I think the great uncle is my grandpa's brother. He had a experience where it was just like him and his wife were having lunch, get done, reasonable health, get done having lunch, go to wash the dishes in the sink, and boom, just like that, had a stroke and virtually died on the floor. I mean, they took him to the hospital, which I feel like sometimes it's a mistake to try to to throw everything at the kitchen sink to try to bring them back, instead of just letting them just pass in that situation, because then it was like a week more of just drama and just he was unconscious the whole time, but like drama and everything else, when if people would just allowed things to run its course naturally, it would have been the end, just right there. And that's how I would prefer to experience things. Just like if something like that ever happens to me, it'd be like yeah, I mean, I don't want any type of medical procedures or anything. It's just like, just don't I don't even want to go to the hospital. It's just let it happen. Just let it be. But like but like a lot of the the next stage, if there isn't like that suddenness, where it's more of that gradual kind of just fading away, like almost like a plant. It's just like you see like a plant, just going from green and full of life to just like starting just to fade away, and it's weird that we do that too on some level, but like moving to the next stage where it's like you go from a terminal condition to like now your world's starting to get smaller and smaller, where it's like you were venturing out in all these different directions. Well, now it's like going from like the couch or the bed, out a little bit, but now gravitating back to that same room, to a point where it's like all of a sudden now you're just in that room. You're not really getting out of that room anymore, and it's just like, how did that even happen? It's like but it just kind of just naturally kind of progresses in that way. And when you watch someone start to go from doing the things they normally do to now it's like they're mostly kind of resting. They're kind of in a state where it's like, I'm not really getting around as much, and then it like changes again when the desire to eat and drink starts to wane. So it's like when that starts to happen, it can be kind of troubling. It's really troubling, when my dog started to do that, because it's like you just know there's nothing really to do at that point besides honor this process and honor them, that like I'm not going to sit there and beg and plead and cry that you're not going to just force it down your mouth. It's like, because that's like the first like knee-jerk reaction, just shove it down your fucking throat and eat it. And I think they on some level, with feeding tubes and stuff, I mean, you get that with people, they're like, well, put feeding tube in if they're not going to eat, but it becomes a point where it becomes like probably non-productive for one, and probably actually harmful, because you're interrupting this natural process But again, when someone stops eating, stops drinking, their appetite is just gone. Check your mental story, and go, well, they're just giving up, or they're about to leave me, or they're just being weak, or whatever you're saying about the situation. There's a different way to look at it. There's a higher perspective, and one way, you could just look at it as like, well, they're not needing the external nourishment anymore. They don't need something from the outside to sustain them. Their soul is getting its nourishment from above. Is one way to kind of look at that. It's like, well, they're not needing this external thing. They're it's about letting go of their identity as a body versus a mind, versus a consciousness, a soul, however you want to label that essence. It's like when you start seeing that process, it's like, well, now their soul is starting to take over more so than their body identity. And the soul identity does not need this kind of external nourishment, is one way to maybe revise that stage of the process. And a big part of that whole dying process is in the narrative you are telling yourself. And so and you can believe what you're telling yourself, even though a lot of those beliefs are unfounded and on very shaky soil to begin with. It's like, well, you just got to question, why do you even believe that? Why are you believing what you're believing about this situation? Most of us, have been raised to believe it based on a culture of fear and hysteria. It's like, well, it's normal to be fearful and hysterical and having these fearful and hysterical stories about it. But when you're in a sick society and around a bunch of sick people that are suffering a lot, it's abnormal not to be, and so looking at that stage of the process, through a different story, and ask God what to do. And ultimately, when that's happening, looking towards God is the best thing that you can do, because a lot of what we experience in the world and the spiritual nature is counterintuitive. And so what our ego sees as a terrible event, our soul and connectedness with the Holy Spirit can teach us how to revise that and see the bigger picture from a higher perspective, for one, but also from a perspective of unity and not separation. And so as you're doing that, and you start to see the next stage, which appears, from my experience, to be kind of going, once people stop eating and drinking, it's a pretty rapid succession after that of like, okay, now they're starting to lose cognitive function, in the sense that they're starting to kind of stare off into space a little bit. A lot of times, I'd see people start to just like kind of almost look like statues, or like just like it's like kind of like they're there physically, but it's like cognitively, it's questionable whether they're even conscious, if they're even aware of what's going on around them. Their physical presence seems to be very feeble, weak, not very much movement, very kind of just what is the word I'm trying to say? Just kind of very static. Maybe that's not the word, but they're just I don't know how to describe it, just very statue-like, on some level. I mean, they're not a lot of movement, but just like something, like that, where it's just like, what's going on with them, Again, it comes down to, are we projecting our own fear and hysteria to the situation? Is it, it's like, they got some labored breathing, if I had labored breathing, I would be uncomfortable. Are they uncomfortable? And then you're projecting a lot of your fears and hysteria on them again. But that's identifying with form again, and it's identifying with a body, and projecting our own fears and insecurities about our body and how we would react in that situation, because we're facing the unknown. Ultimately, death, to me, could best be described as facing the unknown. But we try to put our known onto the unknown, and sometimes if you're identifying only with the body and the pain body, especially as Eckhart Tolle would describe it, then we can then there's a lot more suffering on our part that maybe not even what the other person's experiencing, because they could already kind of be in the absolute and what they're experiencing in and out of the wake and dream periods, where they might be blurring, between having lucid dreaming, lucid, it's blending into the the present moment, where it's like talking to somebody that's not visible to other people, but I'm experiencing it. So it's like we don't really know what they're experiencing once they get to a certain point and can't tell you. And I experience sometimes too, where people like kind of drift into that and then bounce back, and they're lucid, and it's like, oh, are they going to get better? What's going on? And that kind of yo-yoing thing is emotionally taxing and draining, especially if the narratives within are very like, well, are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Was that a miracle? And I think it's important too, especially when it's getting to be closer and closer, and you get that emotional roller coaster going on. It's like, do I pray for healing? Do I pray for good death? What am I supposed to even pray for? Just to let go of, like, I gotta do. That's part of the old mindset, and I think part of this process is then letting go of the I gotta do. I'm in control of things, but just surrendering a lot of that and letting go of those attachments, letting go of those stories, letting go of the dramas, and then just trusting that God's in control, and everything is playing out to divine order, even if we don't understand what that is. Because the alternative, when we are in states of fear and hysteria, and imagining fearfully, especially unconsciously, that has a tendency then to draw those things to us like a magnet, which can then affect the other person. Maybe not so much, but it affects our interpretation of what's going on with them, if that makes sense. And the best thing we can do is not to do that. And so instead of letting the fear unconsciously then manifest in the other person, which then reflects back to us, we can engage with the mind of peace, and embody heaven, and not a fearful attitude to the dying. That are, who knows what they're experiencing. If they haven't developed a lot of discipline and spiritual things, it could be very traumatic and terrifying. Especially if that's all they identify themselves with, is their body, a brain and a body. That's who I am. And if I don't have that, then I'm nothing. That's facing, like, I'm gonna say what was the word? Non-existence. Which is ultimately what the ego mind really fears, is obliteration. It doesn't really fear hell. You would think that concept would be fearful for the ego consciousness, but it's actually the obliteration of non-existence, which is more of the fear. It is almost would prefer hell, surviving in that and enduring being a thing, versus just not existing. That is such a terrifying concept to the ego that it can't even it just doesn't process that. So it's like, being that kind of support, is very important, for others. And as you are being that, as you are being peace and you're being heaven, the other person then too, kind of like a tuning fork, can start to resonate with that energy, and will start to reflect a lot of those same energies back to you. And because we're all connected, we're all one. So keeping that concept in mind is very important through this entire thing. Following up with the next stage of the process that I've seen personally, is the final hurrah. And it's like it's imminent. You don't know when the last breath is coming, but it could be now. And with that, there could be some physical symptoms, and with labored breathing, and fucked up gurgling sounds and shit, and just like shaking, just uncontrollable motions and movements. all sorts of shit, that kind of precedes that final release, like that final it is done type thing. But even in the face of those things, if you're going to be there for someone as they're on their deathbed like that, you're facing in your own self that fear of the unknown too, of like, oh, are they going to have some violent fucking crazy death? I don't know. Are they gonna shake and like, and look like they're in like fucking terrible pain or whatever it happens to be? Those are your imaginings when that's going on. So it's important to check those things as they come up in your own consciousness and go, do I want this to manifest? Just ask yourself that. It's like, if I'm sitting here in the present moment, they're just lying there, semi-unconscious, maybe totally unconscious, probably, experiencing a different reality at that point, in and out of both kind of states. It's important to check your own mental narratives as that's going on, and not to unconsciously draw a curse on the situation, but keep your mind on a blessing. Stop catch with the narrative you're telling yourself. If it's loss, if it's separation, if it's fear, if it's hysteria, if it's drama, it's a good sign you're listening to the wrong guide mentally. Those are all attributes of the old mind, and with that, you can feel it just draining your energy. You can just feel it just being a fucking intense situation, and ask God to help you during now to contain the mind of peace, to contain imaginings of their soul is about to be born. It's like that's a really important thing to think about as this is going on, is that they're about to be born into their new state, being one with our Creator, and then also merging with it's almost like taking a drop of water and then dropping it into the ocean. It's like that essence then gives you a deeper understanding of the ocean. So there's that aspect of things too. But it's very, I feel like, important, when someone's in the final moments, final whatevers, to keep your imaginings, to either just hand it over to God is probably the best thing to do, because it's like keeping your mind still, and allowing God to do what God does, in the situation, and to accept it. Just accept everything that's unfolding is perfect for that particular aspect of divinity, that person, that being, whatever. That exactly what's unfolding is exactly what their soul needs to fully awaken into this new birth. Because if you would just look at the child birthing process, it's like, it's like, it's painful and screaming, hysterical, and this unknown of like, well, what's going to happen, and then when it's finally done, it's like you don't even, like, it's almost like as soon as the birth comes, it's like all the drama and all the fucking everything just is like washed away to now here we are. It's this new creation, this new event, this new understanding, whatever. And so looking at things more as like being like a birth, looking towards Jesus as like the example. Even if we're facing the fear, maybe we got something going on with us, and it's like our time has been brought to our attention that it's limited. Looking for praying miracles and healing is that's one thing, but there's a point where even in biblically where Jesus is looking at his own crucifixion, and it's like, if this is your will that this happens, okay, but if it's not, take this burden from me. So all of these kind of like these experiences that we experience, Jesus also experienced and kind of showed us through the Bible, how to process, how to walk without fear into it, and how to as the example, not to run from it, to accept it. But there's that, when he was in the garden where he's freaking out, let's stay up all night, it's like, if this is going to happen, let's make it happen, but if not, I don't, take it from me, then I don't want this burden. And I feel like we go through that same kind of process then too. But looking at even on the cross, when it's like right before death, when you're watching somebody in that same position too, and it's like, Father, why did you forsake them? What is going on? Looking at Jesus as that example then too, it was like right before, it's like it feels all this darkness and everything else, like feeling alone and forsaken, but then at the end realizing that God's always been in this process with you, and experiencing with you. That's the other part of it. It's like that God is integral in this entire process and not separate from it either. And to look at like Jesus when it comes to like the very end, it's like it is finished. It's a letting go, it's a surrender. Then God takes the final step. It's in letting go of that, and there's a peace that comes with in that letting go into that surrender. And I think what we all experience, that surrender at the end, where that entire process, that it might have been brutal, it might have been peaceful, it might have been easy, it might have been hard, whatever it needed to be for our soul to get to a space of surrender, to letting go, to just trusting in God to take that final. It's like you reach your hand out and be like, I'm done. This is it. You just let it go, and you just wait for God to grab it and just do that final step. And so, I just wanted to share some of those ideas. It's kind of like a hard topic, I guess, to really kind of unpack and talk about. But there's so many people that have been. It's something that unites us all in this. We got people dealing with it in secret, dealing with it privately. There's people you could be working with that are like, you work with them, they seem like they're okay, but then they're going home and they got a dying spouse that they're dealing with or taking care of, or a parent, and then you just don't know about it. You don't know they're struggling with that. And there's a lot of people that can be struggling, especially with what's been going on for the past couple of years with all the sickness and death, and how it's just brought to the forefront of consciousness in a lot of different ways. To kind of unpack it and process it and deal with these things a little bit. Hopefully that brings healing, because ultimately, once you face fear, the other side of the fear is healing. And so a big part of letting go of a lot of these stories and these mental narratives, we're just like, we hold on to these narratives because we don't want to face the fear, we don't want to face the unknown. But on the other side of it, when you face it and grow your faith, not only is your faith grown through facing fear, but in the letting go of the fear, there's healing. Just like, not only so in doing a lot of the facing the fears and everything is a twofold thing. The replacement is healing once you get through it, and then an increase in faith, which then it never goes away. It's like the stronger your faith is, the more that you're able to just kind of just trust how things unfold, and things that only love is real ultimately. Those are probably one of the best things to think, to know. Actually, I mean, it's that only love is real, and as you become more and more aware of that, the more you start to see that being reflected in every aspect of your life. And so, with that being said, I think I'm gonna bounce. So, I appreciate you guys' spiritual support, your financial support. I appreciate you guys liking, sharing, subscribing, all the social networking things, all the physical support. I appreciate that. I know you guys don't have to do that. I don't even necessarily putting it out there like I'm being super needy or whatever, but people are just do it, and I do appreciate it, and so thank you for that. And until the next now, hopefully this was helpful. God bless.